Hi, my name is Robert Davis. I'm here with Moses Siregar III, the author of The Black God's War, as well as the Splendor and Ruin Trilogy, and the co-host of a podcast called Adventures in Sci-Fi Publishing. I'm here today to talk to him about the motivation and some of the themes of his books so that we can understand them better. Let's start with the Black God's War. There's a lot of parallels to the Iliad in that book. I saw there's with people going to the underworld and the interactions between God and men. So can you help us understand the motivation behind the links to that classic work?
Yeah, this book is really an homage to the Iliad, so it has a lot of things in common with the Iliad. You've got a culture invading another culture. By the way, this is all in my own, world. It's a secondary world. So while there are parallels, it's all unique. So the gods, there are 10 gods that one of the cultures worships, but they're not the Greek gods. Some of them have parallels to the Greek gods, perhaps, but they're my own pantheon of gods and my own world building, my own setting like that. So you sort of have a culture that is going to resemble the Greeks in some respects, Rhesia, and they have a very Western religious sort of mentality, and it's a lot of different things. So there's elements of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but they have a pantheon of 10 gods. So it's almost like a Judeo-Christian, Greek pantheon, right? And so they're very fervent about their beliefs, and they believe that it's their divine right to conquer the world. So they're invading the brown people over there, Paulan, and in Paulan it looks more like an ancient India with a Buddhist type philosophy, and the magic on both sides is a little different. So that the book really takes place over a small number of days, the final days of this war that's been dragging on for about 9 years, and so there's things like that are similar, and you have sort of an epic battle, the equivalent of Achilles and Hector in the Iliad. In this book you have Caio and you have Rao, and you have the gods getting involved in the affairs, and so it's my real creative mashup in my own imagination. One difference is that their religious beliefs are different. So the Western type culture, they believe in 10 gods, and they believe very much in gods, and the other culture, which has again somewhat of a more Buddhist mindset, they ultimately believe everything is sort of emptiness, almost a dream in a way. And so that's part of the clash between them. In my book it plays up those differences a little more than you would get where in the Iliad you've got both sides appealing to the same gods, and the gods take sides, on either side, and that's one of the reasons I loved the Iliad as a kid, is because the gods got involved and fought each other and helped their heroes, and so this was something I read in high school, and it's just a story that really stuck with me because the good guys, you would think, are the people you start the story with, the Greeks, and you realize in the end they're just sort of sacking this, relatively, a culture that doesn't necessarily deserve to be sacked and have their entire citadel, razed and destroyed, and it leaves you with this very strange feeling about what's really right and what's wrong. Just because we're hearing the story from the Greek perspective, are they really in the right? There's a lot of things like that, and I enjoyed telling a story from both sides, so that you had this side's perspective, and yet you could, characters on both sides could really appeal to you, and you could see them run into battle and kill each other. So
yes, I remember reading the part where the heroes met at a beach, and I was thinking leading up to that, they're gonna work things out. I was hopeful. I was thinking, okay, yeah, great, they're gonna have a retreat, work things out, and it'll be all good. That's not what happened, but I guess there's some other lessons in the book, right? So there's, with this outside perspective of the two different ideologies, the 10 gods and karma,
in Paulan they believe very much in karma, and so there's that element of Hinduism and Buddhism that's in there sort of as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting how you kind of made those neighbors and kind of contrasted and compared their thought process and their beliefs and their whole ideologies. So, is there an intention to teach tolerance in looking at these from an outside perspective to see the effect of prejudice and the difference between that and people that really seek to understand the other party?
So it's an interesting question. I do kind of write to a theme, you could say, which I found. I have interviewed a lot of authors, as you know, through podcasts, and most authors in science fiction and fantasy won't. They actually don't write to a theme. They'll say that they write a book, they tell a story, and maybe in the end they realize, oh, there is a theme here about vengeance or this or that. And then there's a minority of authors in this genre that seem to actually have a theme in mind when they write, and maybe there's lessons and so on like that. And I will admit I'm that sort of writer because that gives me something to write about,
Okay.
to tell a story about something, and yet I feel like it's really up to the reader to find those meanings.
Okay.
You know, like that. You know, you'll hear people say that a story comes to life. It's only half completed when the author is done with it. The other half of the story comes to life in the reader's mind as they read the story. So the reader actually completes the book
Okay.
by coming to life, and by because the reader has obviously that freedom, also the meanings and the lessons and that's what's fun about being an author, is seeing people draw different conclusions from your work and that sort of thing. So I think there are to speak to your question, there are very different beliefs here, and a lot of the conflict in the book is driven by the fact that these cultures don't understand each other's beliefs, and that becomes increasingly a tragedy as the story goes along. And so there is that possibility to draw that lesson from it, I think.
Okay, so the theme is something that I made up based on what I read, but it's just one of the things that could be found in the story.
Right. You look at Lucia, pretty much the main character in the novel, and her whole development as a character is about these scary, terrible things that have happened to her since she was very young, and her process of coming to peace with that and working through her anger and her distrust and all these sort of things. And some people will read the book and maybe they'll focus more on her development and her story, and so there's so many different things. So it's something I like to leave open.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I like how there's a lot of places where you can fill in the gaps with what you assume to be happening. I've noticed in the prelude, this Black God's War is a prelude to a trilogy.
Right.
I noticed in the prelude there's the gods are portrayed as working together, as Lord Donato said at one point, that they all act together. But a later book title within the trilogy mentions the gods divided. It hints at some disharmony. Does the conflict escalate beyond the human realm in the trilogy?
Yeah, I think it's been neat to see that people who have read the Black God's War often, there's mystery about the gods and who are they really? There's a lot of mystery around it. There's enough to kind of whet your mind about it, and have an appetite for that. So later, the next book is called The Ninth Wind. That one is already published. The book after that is called The Gods Divided, so it's pretty fairly out there. And then The End of the Sun is planned as the third book in the trilogy, the fourth book in the series. So I will say, because I don't want to do the big spoiler alerts here, the end of The Ninth Wind, by the time the reader is at that point, they see that things have really changed with regard to the gods, and it sets up the possibility of what's going to happen with the gods next. Because at one point, you're right. The Black God speaks of that the gods are ultimately one, and yet they have their distinct personalities and roles, and appearances and so on. But so for the gods to be divided, something would have to change very much in the world. And so by the end of The Ninth Wind, the reader has definitely a clear idea of what has changed, so that title could possibly make sense.
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to reading the trilogy
Thank
itself. So, Moses Siregar III, where can you be found online?
I'm probably most active on Facebook. You can look me up on Facebook. I also have a blog that I haven't updated in a long time, but there's some info about my stories and so on there. And that's just sciencefictionfantasy.net. But Facebook, I have a Twitter account, but tend to do more Facebook these days. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This is Robert Davis with Moses Siregar III.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it, man.